Russia is on manoeuvres and wants the West to know about it, releasing pictures of its drones hitting an aerial target over occupied Crimea, which it forcibly took from Ukraine in 2014. These tests take place as Russia demands guarantees from NATO that it will never allow Ukraine to join and that it will roll back its military deployments in Central and Eastern Europe, guarantees that NATO so far has been unwilling to issue. In Ukraine itself, they're reduced to manning trenches as the army fights Russian-backed separatists for the 8th year. In a sign of solidarity, the presidents of Lithuania and Poland, both NATO members, met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today, with a clear message to NATO: do more to counter the Russian threat.
I strongly believe that we can build a strong platform on security matters that not only protects NATO countries, but also Ukraine from any kind of Russian aggression. I want to repeat that we should act preventatively and demand Russia takes a serious step back.
A US delegation in Ukraine to help strengthen the country's air defences. President Putin sees this sort of cooperation as a threat to his backyard. Satellite images from the last 2 months show Russian battle groups training near the border, a build-up that the US and Ukraine fear could be a prelude to a full-scale Russian invasion. And this weekend, Russia sent 2 nuclear-capable long-range bombers to patrol the skies over Belarus, part of its message to NATO to stay out of the region. The Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko, who has his own tensions with the West, has already said that he is ready to host Russian nuclear weapons. The stage is indeed set, but for exactly what? Well, let's find out. A short time ago, I spoke to Fiona Hill, the British-born Russia expert who served as an advisor to no less than 3 American presidents. I began by asking her whether the Russian troops on the border and Russia's demands are posturing or signs that President Putin is planning a military invasion of Ukraine.
I think it's both of those things, Matt. I think that's the problem. And, it's very likely that he will do something. What we're looking at is almost like a hostage situation. So Ukraine is being held hostage with these very high demands put on the table. And as we know in those situations, sometimes something very nasty happens to the person who's been, taken for ransom. And I think what we're also seeing now is that it's more than just Ukraine, which some of us have been saying for some time. This can't be resolved by just thinking about the future status of Ukraine's relationships with NATO and the European Union, for example. The demands that the Russian government have put forward go far beyond that.
And these are impossible demands, aren't they? I mean, they include that basically there'd be no sort of military presence of NATO in NATO member states like Lithuania and Poland. And of course, that Ukraine, an independent country, should never be allowed to join NATO. These are impossible demands, aren't they?
Yeah, and they even go further than that. I mean, if you read them very carefully, there's even a suggestion that the United States should not be having any kind of out-of-area operations anywhere near Russia's territory. And we tend to forget that Russia is a vast state with a landmass that extends into the Asia-Pacific. So that could also cover some of the operations that the United States does together with Japan, very close to Russian territorial waters. So there's a lot in here that makes it extremely difficult to tackle.
Do you think that Vladimir Putin knows that these demands are essentially impossible to meet and he's just trying it on, or is this part of his intimidation tactics? Again,
it's all of the above. Because, there may be that there's some threshold beneath that might be acceptable, but we don't know what that is. And clearly, by stating these demands, which would require us, in fact, going back 30 years to the collapse of the Soviet Union and doing a redo, which isn't very feasible, we're going to be ensnarled in all kinds of negotiations for some time as they continue to put up the ante. I don't think we should think that this can be resolved anytime soon. We're going to be in basically a management situation for quite some time. And then I guess the Russians are going to look and see what we're going to put on the table. But at the same time, I think we have to be very vigilant for some form of military action because Putin wants to make the threats very credible.
Is there any way of answering Russia's security concerns without throwing Ukraine, Poland or Lithuania under the bus?
Yeah, there is, and we've already done it in many respects. It's the Organisation for the Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, which came out of the Helsinki Final Act. I mean, we did this once before in the late 1970s when the Soviet Union was very worried about all of these things, because that gives basically a forum and a framework for every state, large and small, within Europe and the United States and Canada. But the Russians, for a very long time, have been dissatisfied with that. But it is possible that we could reinvigorate that framework, but we'll have to take, very serious diplomatic effort.
Two more brief questions. And the first one is one that people always ask themselves in the West is, what does Vladimir Putin actually want out of all this?
Well, he wants the maximum room for manoeuvre. He wants to press the maximalist position of Russia and Russia's interests. And he wants to ensure that he can mobilize people behind him at home to stay in power. I think for Putin, this is all about timing for his perspective. He's worried that Ukraine is moving away very rapidly. And he's got his own 2024 to think about, which is his re-election for yet another set of terms as president. And he also wants to make sure that Russia is established as one of the big powers on the world stage, along with China and the United States.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, where do we stand at the moment in terms of some kind of future conflict?
Well, I think we're around a 7 or an 8 right now, to be honest. And we've been there before at different points
7,
during
8.
the Cold War. Yeah, no, but in terms of just the way that they are framing this, it doesn't mean to say that that's going to happen, though, just to be very clear. But the tensions are very high. This is very reminiscent of the 1980s when we had the war scare of the Ural missiles crisis, the SS-20 and Pershing missile crisis stationing in Europe. And so, again, we've had these various flashpoints. We had flashpoints during the war between Russia and Georgia, when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008. So, again, this is very serious. The Russians are escalating this deliberately, just to be very clear. This is a manufactured crisis because of Russia's own concerns and Putin's own concerns about timing, but it is very serious. And so we should be focused on managing this and finding a different pathway short of allowing the Russians to proceed with some kind of military intervention.
Fiona Hill, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.